Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're headed to Myanmar to explore the story of Aung San Suu Kyi.
Oh, yeah.
We have a fascinating analysis to dig into called Hin,
Okay.
which basically means Myanmar's turmoil, powerless to save itself. And this piece goes beyond just the headlines. It really dives into the economic and political turmoil by looking at the stories of the key players involved.
And it really does feel kind of like a political thriller.
Yeah.
With betrayals and power grabs and even a surprising Hollywood connection.
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to this story.
Absolutely.
I think it really highlights how individual choices and motivations have shaped the crisis that's going on today.
Yeah. And how those choices are really intertwined with larger historical forces
Yeah.
that have been shaping the country for decades.
Yeah, and I think it is kind of like a Shakespearean drama playing out on this global stage. So let's set the scene.
Yeah.
Most people know Aung San Suu Kyi as the daughter of Myanmar's independence hero, a Nobel Peace Prize winner who spent years under house arrest
Right.
fighting for democracy. And then in 2010,
Yeah.
something really interesting happened. A film called The Lady,
Oh, yeah.
starring Michelle Yeoh,
Yes.
brought her story to the world.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating how that film, directed by Luc Besson, really shaped global perceptions of Aung San Suu Kyi, portraying her as the symbol of unwavering courage and peaceful resistance. And it certainly played a role in getting international support for her cause.
And it's like Michelle Yeoh almost stepped into that role and amplified Aung San Suu Kyi's voice
Yeah.
to the world on a global scale. And, it really makes you think about the power of storytelling.
Oh.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So just a few years later,
Yeah.
her party, the National League for Democracy, won a landslide election victory. And it seemed like Myanmar was finally turning a corner toward democracy.
Yeah.
But then the 2021 coup just shattered everything.
Yeah.
Our source describes this moment so vividly. Soldiers barging into this meeting room,
Oh, wow.
detaining Aung San Suu Kyi and other government officials.
The source really captures that initial shock and confusion and the sense of disbelief that a country seemingly on the cusp of democratic reform could be plunged back into military rule just like that.
It must have felt like such a punch to the gut for so many people
Yeah.
who had put all their hopes in Aung San Suu Kyi and that promise of a democratic future. And of course,
Yeah.
leading this dramatic takeover was Min Aung Hlaing, the architect of the coup.
Now, it's important to understand Min Aung Hlaing's story not as just this one-dimensional villain,
Right.
but as a product of his environment and his own ambition. He came from humble beginnings, attended law school, but realized that the military held the true reins of power in Myanmar.
So instead of becoming a lawyer, he decides to join the very institution that he might have challenged in court.
It's a pretty bold move. It was
Yeah.
a calculated one.
Mhm.
He quickly rose through the ranks.
Yeah. Spending years fighting against these various ethnic armed groups.
Oh, wow.
He was known for his ruthless tactics
Oh, jeez.
and his ability to just consolidate power. He eventually created this National Security and Defense Council, or NSDC,
NSDC. Okay.
which essentially gave the military control over these key government functions,
Oh, wow.
superseding the civilian government.
So that's really crucial because it lays the groundwork for the coup, right? He didn't just seize power out of nowhere. He spent years methodically building a system that enabled him to take over.
Exactly. The coup, as brazen as it seemed, was actually legal,
Wow.
according to the framework that Min Aung Hlaing had put in place.
Wow.
It was a long game.
That's talk about playing chess with the fate of a nation.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. Seizing power is one thing. Governing is quite another.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's where the perfect storm, as our source calls it, really starts to brew.
Yeah.
It's a combination of factors that created just this cascade of challenges for the military junta. Right. And it all starts with the economic fallout from the coup.
Mm-hmm.
Western nations responded with these targeted sanctions,
Right.
which hit Myanmar's economy really hard, especially the garment industry.
Yeah.
A major source of jobs. Our source cites a really staggering statistic. The value of the Myanmar kyat, their currency, plummeted by over 60% within months.
60%.
Yeah.
That's That's a devastating blow. Imagine the impact on ordinary people, businesses,
Absolutely.
the entire country.
It was a recipe for just widespread hardship and discontent,
Yeah.
which created really fertile ground for the second factor in this perfect storm, the resurgence of ethnic armed groups.
Okay.
Now, Myanmar has this long and complex history of ethnic conflict, with various groups fighting for autonomy or independence.
Right.
Min Aung Hlaing attempted a very hardline approach, but it backfired spectacularly.
So instead of quelling the unrest, his actions actually inflamed it.
Precisely. The source highlights several key players here.
Okay.
You have the Kachin Independence Army in the north, the Three Brothers Alliance, a coalition of powerful armed groups in the northeast,
Okay.
and the formidable Wa State Army, which controls a large territory along the border with China.
Wow. So it's like the coup opened a Pandora's box with all these simmering conflicts just erupting at once. And then to make matters worse, the military junta proved completely inept at governing.
Right.
They were plagued by corruption, resorted to these internet shutdowns that crippled the economy further, and unleashed these brutal crackdowns that only fueled more resentment and resistance.
Their actions created this self-perpetuating cycle of violence and instability. They alienated the population, empowered these armed groups, and essentially drove the country deeper into chaos.
So it's like they took every wrong turn possible. And with each misstep, the situation spiraled further out of control. And it's into this maelstrom that a new player emerges, the National Unity Government, or NU.
Yes.
So tell me more about them. How did they come about?
So the NUG is a really fascinating case study in resilience and defiance. It's essentially like this shadow government formed by ousted lawmakers, activists, and representatives from all these different ethnic groups. They claim to be the legitimate voice of the people, and they completely reject the military junta's authority.
So now we have two governments.
Yeah.
That's got to be confusing for everyone involved.
It is, and to make matters even more complex, we have three armies vying for control.
Three armies.
The military, the NUG's armed wing, known as the People's Defense Force.
Okay.
And then the various ethnic armed groups, each with their own agendas.
It's this tangled web of alliances and rivalries and shifting power dynamics.
Absolutely.
So we have our players on the board. We have the military junta clinging to power, the NUG trying to rally the resistance, and then this constellation of ethnic armed groups all vying for control. So where does this leave Aung San Suu Kyi in all of this?
Well, she's been released from prison, but her future and her role in Myanmar's ongoing drama remains uncertain.
And that's a story we'll delve into right after this.
Okay.
So before the break, we were talking about this chaotic landscape of Myanmar's politics and the emergence of the NUG as this force opposing the military junta. It's just mind-boggling to think that a country could have two governments and three armies, all vying for control.
It's a situation that really defies easy categorization.
Yeah.
The NUG operating largely in exile.
Right.
And in areas controlled by these ethnic armed groups has had to be so resourceful to maintain its presence and its influence.
It's like they're playing this high-stakes game of political chess, trying to outmaneuver the military junta while also navigating the complexities of their alliances with the ethnic armed groups. And of course, looming over all of this is the legacy of Aung San Suu Kyi.
Her story really does take on an almost Shakespearean quality when you consider the arc of her journey. From international icon of democracy to prisoner of the very regime she fought against. And now a figure whose legacy is just so deeply intertwined with the fate of her nation.
You know, I remember watching that film, The Lady.
Yeah.
And being so moved by her just unwavering commitment to democracy and peaceful resistance.
Yeah.
It's hard to reconcile that image with the complexities of the situation today.
Right. It's a reminder that even the most iconic figures are human with their own flaws and contradictions.
Right.
And it's also a testament to the power of storytelling in shaping our perceptions for peoples and events.
You know, The Lady presented a very specific narrative, one that resonated deeply with audiences all over the world. But as we've seen, the reality on the ground is just so much more nuanced and often tragic.
It's why it's so crucial to go beyond the headlines and delve into the deeper historical context, the intricate web of relationships, and the often competing interests that are at play.
So let's do that. Let's unpack the events that led up to the coup. And the choices that Aung San Suu Kyi made
Okay.
during that pivotal period,
Yeah.
after her party's landslide victory in 2015, she assumed the role of state counselor,
Right.
a position that gave her significant power, though she was still barred from the presidency.
Right. That period was marked by this sense of cautious optimism. Many hoped that Aung San Suu Kyi, with her international stature and moral authority,
Right.
could guide Myanmar towards a more democratic future. But there were also challenges, not least of which was the military's entrenched power within the political system.
Right. The military essentially wrote the rules of the game to ensure their continued influence, even in this supposedly democratic system.
Yeah.
It's like they were holding all the trump cards,
Yeah.
even as they allowed a degree of political openness.
And within that context, Aung San Suu Kyi had to make some very difficult choices.
Right.
She chose to engage with the military, to work within the system, rather than directly challenge it.
Right.
Some saw this as pragmatism,
Yeah.
like a necessary compromise to achieve incremental progress. Others criticized it as appeasement,
Yeah.
arguing that she was legitimizing a regime that had committed grave human rights abuses.
It's like that classic dilemma, right? Do you work within a flawed system to try to change it from within?
Right.
Or do you risk confrontation and potentially destabilize the entire system? There's no easy answer.
And in Aung San Suu Kyi's case, her choices became even more fraught when the Rohingya crisis erupted in 2017.
Right. And this is where things get really complicated.
Yeah.
The Rohingya, a Muslim minority group in Myanmar, faced brutal persecution by the military, leading to just this mass exodus of refugees fleeing to neighboring Bangladesh.
Yeah. The scale of the violence and the displacement was horrific.
Yeah.
And Aung San Suu Kyi's response was widely condemned. She defended the military's actions, downplayed the severity of the crisis, and refused to even acknowledge the term Rohingya,
Wow.
which many saw as just this denial of their identity and suffering.
It was such a shocking turn of events for someone who had been lauded as this champion of human rights.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
Well, there are a few possible explanations.
Okay.
Some believe that she was genuinely convinced by the military's narrative. They were fighting against terrorists.
Okay.
Others suggest that she was prioritizing national unity and stability over the rights of this marginalized minority.
And still others argue that she was simply trying to maintain her delicate balance of power with the military, fearing that open criticism would jeopardize her position and the fragile progress that had been made.
It's likely a combination of factors.
Yeah.
And her silence on the Rohingya crisis remains a real stain on her legacy. You know, it disillusioned many of her international supporters and raised all these questions about her commitment to democratic values.
It's a stark reminder that leadership, even when driven by good intentions, can be deeply flawed and have really unintended consequences.
Yeah. And it highlights the complexities of navigating these power dynamics within a system where the military holds so much sway.
So with her international reputation tarnished and her relationship with the military becoming increasingly strained, the stage was set for the 2021 coup.
It's important to remember that even before the coup, the military had never really relinquished control. They had carefully constructed this system that allowed them to intervene whenever they felt their interests were threatened.
So the coup, while shocking, was perhaps not entirely surprising in hindsight.
Exactly. The military had been laying the groundwork for years.
Right.
And the events of 2017 and 2018, including the Rohingya crisis and Aung San Suu Kyi's perceived weakness, likely emboldened them to make their move.
It's just a tragic tale of ambition and betrayal. And the fragility of democracy. And in the midst of all this turmoil, the people of Myanmar continue to struggle. Caught between a brutal military regime and a fragmented opposition.
And that brings us back to the question of Aung San Suu Kyi's role in all of this.
Right.
She's been released from prison, but her movements are restricted, and her voice has been largely silenced.
What does her future hold? Can she or anyone heal these deep divisions that have fractured Myanmar and chart a path towards a more peaceful and just future?
Those are the questions we'll explore next.
You know, we've been exploring the twists and turns of Aung San Suu Kyi's journey. It's a story that's just captivated the world for decades.
Mm.
From her years under house arrest fighting for democracy to her rise to power and then her very sudden fall from grace. It's been quite a roller coaster ride.
And through it all, the question that keeps coming back is, what role can she play now?
Right.
Can she bridge those divides? Can she reconcile the different factions and guide Myanmar towards a more peaceful future?
I mean, it's a question with no easy answers,
Hmm.
especially given how complex the situation is on the ground. We've talked about the military junta's iron grip on power, the emergence of the NUG and the People's Defense Force, and then all these different ethnic armed groups, each with their own, goals and agendas.
It's a landscape of constantly shifting alliances, deep-seated mistrust, and this history of violence.
Yeah.
That makes any kind of reconciliation just seem almost impossible.
And there's the question of Aung San Suu Kyi's legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Her reputation has been tarnished, by how she handled the Rohingya crisis.
Yeah.
And her silence when faced with the military's atrocities has just left so many people feeling betrayed
Yeah.
and disillusioned.
It's a reminder that even the most revered figures are human,
Yeah.
capable of both great courage and really profound moral failings. And in Aung San Suu Kyi's case, her actions have had just this devastating impact on the very people she claimed to represent.
And, it's heartbreaking to think about the human cost of this conflict. Millions have been displaced, countless lives lost, and the country is teetering on the brink of economic collapse.
The source really paints a bleak picture of the situation on the ground.
Yeah.
People are struggling to survive, basic services have broken down, and fear and uncertainty just permeate every aspect of their daily lives.
It's just a stark reminder that behind the political maneuvering and the power struggles, there are real people whose lives have been shattered by all of this.
And it really underscores the urgency of finding a solution, a path towards peace and reconciliation.
But where does that path even begin? Can Aung San Suu Kyi, once the symbol of hope for a democratic Myanmar, can she reclaim that mantle?
Right.
Or is her story and the stories of Myanmar itself, are they destined for tragedy?
I think those are the questions that really linger in your mind long after you finish reading this analysis. The future of Myanmar is so uncertain, just this tangled web of possibilities and perils.
What's clear, though, is that the choices that are made in these coming months and years are going to have profound consequences for the people of Myanmar.
Absolutely.
And for the region as a whole.
It's a situation that really demands our attention, our empathy, and our willingness to engage with all of its complexities without resorting to easy answers or overly simplistic narratives.
This deep dive has been just a really sobering reminder that the fight for democracy and human rights is often long and arduous. There are going to be setbacks, disappointments along the way. But it's also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, that unwavering hope for a better future, even in the face of these seemingly insurmountable challenges.
And maybe that's the most important takeaway, from this whole story. The future of Myanmar remains unwritten. And the choices that they make today will determine whether it will be a story of hope or a descent into further darkness. And it's a story that's worth following, worth engaging with, and worth fighting for.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring this story, to seek out different perspectives, and to never lose sight of the human cost of this ongoing crisis. Until next time, keep diving deep.